It appears not. Leave is granted.
Thank you, sir.
One further call. Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to speak at the second reading of the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Bill, which sets up an environment management regime for New Zealand's exclusive economic zone. And I'd like to state at the outset that this government believes our natural environment is our greatest asset, and that successful and economic and environmental policies can and must go hand in hand. New Zealand's exclusive economic zone and extended continental shelf is one of the largest in the world, and they offer significant economic opportunities, unknown bounty, and could sustain and improve our living standards. But they are also an important part of our environment and need protecting. So this bill fills a regulatory gap that currently exists in managing environmental effects of offshore activities like petroleum exploration and mining in this area of the sea. So we go from open slather to a new regime. And I think it's a very politically interesting bill because it neatly divides the House. On the one side, we've got the Greens, who what I refer to as the extremist parties, and I suppose Mana might be in the same camp, who basically don't want anything to happen at all. And the idea of balancing economic gain and environmental preservation is an anathema to them. By their logic, if there is any risk, you don't do it. Lord knows how they pluck up the courage to get into a car every day, because you have to take risks in life, and any negative effect on the environment is reason not to do something new. And for that reason, they oppose new dairy farms, they oppose salmon farms, and basically they're keen to wind down the dairy industry because of the effect it has on the environment. Well, that might be nice as a slogan, but I don't think we all really want to lower our living standards to the degree that would be affected by their policies if they got an opportunity to bring them in. And amazingly, the Greens still talk about New Zealand's living standards, housing affordability. They worry about New Zealanders leaving to go to Australia, but when it really comes down to it, their instinct is to put roadblocks in the way of progress, and you can't have it both ways. Then we have the Labour Party, which is basically, on this bill, a light version of the Greens. They're torn. They know that most New Zealanders realise that we have to make a living in this country, and they like it, and they know that we can't opt out of the competitive world, that our kids generally want to live in dynamic and exciting countries where, with strong economies and good job prospects. They know these things, and yet they don't want to be outdone by the Greens. And so their position is basically the same: don't do anything, bind up the process in a thick web of consultation and endless opportunities for litigation, delay and uncertainty. And then when it comes to New Zealand First, well, I can't find anything coherent in their minority view. In fact, I defy anybody to make any sense out of what they're saying there. It appears that New Zealand stands on the verge of succumbing to a resource curse scenario, according to the New Zealand's First. It sounds quite nice, actually, succumbing to a resource curse scenario. I don't know. I'm not sure where it comes from. But where we stand with the National Party is getting on with bringing in legislation to fill a gap in our regulatory environment, and doing so in a practical and workable way that recognises that New Zealanders want and demand an effective economy, which means being open to using our natural resources. And at the same time, they treasure our natural environment and expect that our legislation seeks to strike a reasonable balance and practical balance. And I have every confidence, Mr. Speaker, that the Environmental Protection Authority will make the judgments rationally and with due caution, as is outlined in this legislation. It is worth remembering, Mr. Speaker, that up till now the environmental effects of activities within this area have been very narrowly considered, and the Resource Management Act provides environmental protection only to the 12-mile limit, and so this bill extends that right out to 200 miles and to the continental shelf, which is a major advance. And the bill provides a strong and effective framework to ensure that the processes are in place to assess and manage adverse environmental effects in our oceans, to provide greater certainty to investors and existing interests, to meet New Zealand's international obligations, notwithstanding the complaints made on the other side, and to do this in a most efficient and effective way possible. So the bill does not and does not intend to be an RMA of the seas. The RMA was designed for predominantly land-based issues, reflecting a multitude of interacting parties. It would not make sense when you're dealing with maybe a dozen such cases in an area that is 20 times the size of New Zealand, and indeed fourth or fifth largest area in the world in terms of an EEZ. And the current levels of activity on the continental shelf are low, and indications, as I said, suggest that we might not have more than 10 applications. And to this end, Clause 19 sends out a general duty to avoid, remedy or mitigate adverse environmental effects. And this includes a duty to provide training and supervision to all employees to ensure compliance with the legislation, regulations and consent conditions, as well as sufficient resources and establishing appropriate management systems. And an impact assessment will form the basis of all consent applications so that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, can assess the effects of the environment and existing interests. And so the EPA will be the decision making. So all in all, I think this bill is a major advance in terms of the environmental legislation in this country. It does strike an effective balance. It shows that the government does understand that we live in a real world where we have to make a living. We have to make some use of the resources that we have available to us. And it just shows, that some parties are aware of that and other parties talk about catching up with Australia, growing the economy, but when it comes down to it, they're always in favour of when the legislation comes into the House, they are in favour of ones that put roadblocks in the way of every bit of economic progress that this country needs and deserves. So I stand right for this and I commend this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. Ayes have party vote. Clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party.
14 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Maori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United First.
Order.
1 in favour.
Ayes are 64, noes 57. The motion is agreed to.
Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. Call on government orders of the day numbers 3 and 4.
Biosecurity Law Reform Bill, committee stage.